When you speak with one of the guards at the southern gate of the protagonist village in Square Enix's 2021 role-playing game NieR Replicant version 1.22474487139, he warns that the manor in the plains beyond is, quote, a right creepy place, and that, quote, you can tell it's haunted just by looking at it. And yet, the player must venture into the manor twice to finish the game. Both of these journeys take the form of a Katabasis, a descent into the underworld to locate an important person or object, a narrative structure originating in ancient epic poetry that also characterizes anti-pastoral landscapes in RPGs. Players of Replicant have noted that there is a striking resemblance between Emil's Manor and Spencer Manor from the original Resident Evil game, which is especially evident in the design of areas like the entrance hall. But while the manor self-consciously emulates horror conventions, its music is atypical owing to its employment of anti-pastoral and lament elements. Duncan Williams asserts that, quote, combining emotionally congruent soundtracking with game narrative has the potential to create significantly stronger effective responses than either stimulus alone, unquote. And I argue that the manor's dynamic music elicits a powerful yet nuanced emotional response by closely aligning with the narrative contingencies of each Katabasis, initially affirming the guard's assertion that the manor is a right creepy place, and later encouraging the player to empathize with Emil as he recalls his tragic past. NieR Replicant follows its eponymous protagonist's quest to save his sister Yona from a fatal disease called the Black Scrawl, and the player first visits the manor approximately halfway through the game, when Yona asks NieR to help her ill pen pal, who, quote, lives in this really big house down south. NieR agrees and journeys to the manor with his companions Kaine and Grimoire Weiss. After being shown to the dining room by the manor's butler, the player sets about locating Yona's pen pal, and like the heroes of classical epic, they must complete a series of tasks to advance through the area, such as locating keys to open locked doors and battling enemies called shades. Although characters sometimes journey to the actual underworld in RPGs, the manor serves as what Erling B. Holtsmark terms an emblematic hell, or an area that metaphorically represents the underworld through its foreboding visual features. The building's corridors are narrow, many of its rooms are claustrophobic, and the player only receives a map when they meet Emil, the young master of the manor, about halfway through their Katabasis, which makes wayfinding difficult. In addition, all of the color drains from the game world once the player steps through the front gate, producing an eerie sepia tone that pervades the interior of the building as well. The manor's monochromatic color scheme renders it noticeably darker than most other parts of Replicant's world, which contributes to the player's apprehension as they explore its confined rooms and corridors. That being said, Simon Niedenthal stresses that, quote, darkness is only one means of creating obscurity, unquote, and the manor's sepia tone is not the only feature that undermines the player's sense of security. Compounding the disquieting effect of these darkened surroundings is the manor's use of fixed camera angles, a feature that it draws directly from the horror genre. Richard Roos III notes that fixed camera angles were used in early survival horror games to make them, quote, look significantly better than their contemporaries, unquote. But Guillaume Rougerard argues that more recent games may also employ this feature to unsettle players, quote, even though they're not required to do so for technical reasons anymore. This is the case with Replicant, as the game's photorealistic graphics and the control that the player normally has over the camera make it clear that the manor could use a regular third-person perspective if the developers wanted it to. The fact that it does not, and the fact that the manor is the only part of the game world to use fixed camera angles, suggests that this feature is a deliberate design decision that is meant to foster feelings of anxiety in the player. The manor's non-diegetic music, a track called The Ultimate Weapon, magnifies the apprehension that the area's visual features engender. The Ultimate Weapon is in C minor and 3/4 time, and it is essentially binary, employing an A-B, A'-B' structure plus a 12-bar transition. As is typical for location music in the NieR games, the instrumentation of the piece varies depending on which part of the manor the player is exploring. I have labeled these versions loops 1 through 4 as outlined in this table. Loop 1 plays in the above-ground portion of the manor, and it is entirely a cappella, its sparse texture confined to a main female vocal line with indecipherable text by NieR series singer Emmy Evans, and 2 non-texted accompanying vocal parts. Evans's breathy timbre and the slight reverb on the track create a ghostly effect, and these features, combined with the main vocal line's emphasis on conjunct motion and the accompanying vocals' open fourths and fifths in the A sections, lend the ultimate weapon a funereal quality through its resemblance to chant. Let's listen to part of the piece now. Gamers frequently describe Loop 1 of the Ultimate Weapon as unsettling, with one person commenting on YouTube that, quote, "the mansion music always creeps them out." I contend that Loop 1 creates this emotional response because it employs a number of what I term integral anti-pastoral features, which elicit strong feelings of apprehension from players when used in combination. The anti-pastoral pieces that were rated the most disquieting by participants in my research study on music and landscapes in Final Fantasy X, XII, XIII, and XV use most or all of these characteristics, and many of them are present in Loop 1 of the Ultimate Weapon as well. Although it is almost exclusively diatonic, Loop 1 creates tension through chromatic motion in the main vocal line and unresolved dissonance in the melody and accompaniment. The leading tone consistently fails to resolve to the tonic, save for the junction between the A and B sections, and the sudden shift from natural to harmonic minor in measures 8 and 16 of the A and A prime sections produces an unresolved tritone in the accompanying vocals, which you can see here. In addition, the only chromatic harmony, an A half diminished seventh chord in the A and A prime sections, frustrates the listener's expectation that it will resolve to a B-flat major chord by moving to 6/7 in the following measure. Loop 1 also unsettles the player through the use of what Isabella van Elferen refers to as, quote, elements that undermine closure. The dominant triad at the conclusion of the B sections and transition, for instance, is suggestive of a half cadence, but it is in first inversion, and the 4/6/4 chord in the preceding measure negates the potential cadence point altogether. Likewise, the B diminished triad at the conclusion of the A and A prime sections moves to a 6 chord instead of the tonic harmony, which undermines the resolution of the leading tone to the tonic in the main vocal line. In addition, the accompanying vocals function analogously to what K.J. Donnelly terms tension ostinatos, by almost continuously articulating dotted half notes that are grouped into 2-measure motivic units. They also provide drones on C and D in the opening measures of the transition, which produce a tritone against the A-flat in the main vocals and create some momentary harmonic ambiguity due to Loop 1's sparse texture. Eventually, the player locates Emil's butler, who reveals that he sent letters to Yona in the hope of convincing NieR to come to the manor and vanquish a group of shades in the study. After completing this final task, NieR leaves the manor with his companions. But shortly after he returns home, tragedy strikes. A massive shade attacks his village, and the Shadow Lord, the game's main antagonist, kidnaps Yona. NieR is badly wounded during the battle, and Emil petrifies Kaine to seal the shade in the basement of the village library. 5 years pass. NieR receives a letter from Emil asking him to come to the manor, necessitating a second visit to this foreboding part of Replicant's world, during which the horrors of Emil's past are revealed. Even more than the player's first foray into the manor, this journey is a classic Katabasis. After the protagonists reunite, Emil explains that he may be able to find a cure for his petrification curse in a part of the manor called the Planning Room, and he, NieR, and Weiss enter the manor's underground research facility via a hidden stairway in the courtyard. Once inside, the player must navigate the facility's 3 levels by repeatedly searching for key cards to unlock doors. Finally, they arrive at the depths, a concrete room in the facility's lowest level where they encounter Emil's sister Halua, who has been transformed into a terrifying creature called Ultimate Weapon No. 6 through magical experimentation. Madeline Scherer asserts that the literary Katabasis is, quote, fundamentally a tale of recollection, and the sojourn into the underground facility is likewise the catalyst for Emil's recovery of his lost memories. At the conclusion of each floor, the player finds a report for Plan Snow White, like the one pictured here, which provides insight into the weapons research conducted in the facility approximately 1500 years earlier. These reports jog Emil's memory, and he doubles over in pain while muttering things like, "What was I doing here?" It's only when he is face to face with Ultimate Weapon No. 6, however, that his memories come flooding back to him, and he murmurs, "I remember now. I remember everything," before detailing his and his sister's tragic past as test subjects in the facility to NieR and Weiss. In terms of its visual features, the underground facility is a more typical anti-pastoral landscape. Its industrial appearance resonates with depictions of the militaristic, technologically advanced city that disrupts the pastoral world of Virgil's eclogues by confiscating shepherds' land to resettle soldiers, and it relies on a labyrinthine layout and various forms of obscurity to keep the player on edge. In addition to its dim lighting, one of the key ways in which the facility unsettles players is through what Meiji Saif el-Nazir et al. Term occlusion, or, quote, blocking by architectural objects. Stacks of wooden crates and shelving units frequently conceal pathways from the player, and the rooms that the player must search for key cards are rendered as fully enclosed buildings that offer a glimpse of their interiors only after the player steps inside, which causes the shades lurking within to startle them on several occasions. Once again, the camera angle is also partly to blame for preventing the player from discerning their surroundings. Whereas the fully top-down camera in areas like the junk heap enhance visibility by providing the player with a clear view of the immediate vicinity, the camera in the research facility is always significantly tilted towards the player, which causes the walls and other structures to obstruct their view of doors, shades, and most importantly, keycards, as you can see here. While the player can rotate the camera to better ascertain their surroundings, this is not always feasible when combating swarms of shades, which means that keycards frequently go unnoticed and must specifically be sought out, causing the player to spend more time in this area than they would like to. The Ultimate Weapon also serves as the non-diegetic music for the underground facility, but the instrumentation is markedly different from Loop 1 and changes depending on which floor the player is traversing. The percussion ostinatos in Loops 2 and 3 lend the track a militaristic quality, which is fitting since one of the Plan Snow White reports affiliates the facility with the National Weapons Research Laboratory. Like Loop 1, Loops 2 through 4 also employ several anti-pastoral elements that magnify the player's apprehension about their surroundings. One of the most conspicuous of these features is the piano's 4-measure ostinato, which, like William Chang describes in relation to Silent Hill's music, quote, achieves an oppressive effect by repeating with unwavering regularity, unquote, and with little variation in pitch structure. The violins and cellos create additional tension by providing drones, and the cellos employ quasi-melodic lines in the A' and B' sections, which reflects K.J. Donnelly's assertion that melodies in the low strings that, quote, tend not to be particularly memorable or tuneful, unquote, are a common feature of horror film soundtracks. Let's listen to part of Loop 3 now. That being said, loops 2 through 4 are also somewhat atypical due to their use of lament elements. In a 2021 interview with the New Musical Express, NieR series composer Keiichi Okabe states that he aimed to, quote, create music that gives off multifaceted emotions, unquote, when writing Replicant's soundtrack, and he describes the game's sound world as follows, quote, I had been informed that the setting of Replicant is constantly sad, so even when I was tasked with creating music for a location or situation, I always made sure to convey the tragic fates that the protagonist and characters are burdened with. In The Ultimate Weapon, this manifests in a descending tetrachord bass line in the A and A prime sections. Gillian Wyatt has shown that the Legend of Zelda series employs the lament topic to convey loss, and the continued association of the descending tetrachord bass with grief is also clear from its usage in tracks like Sorrow Without Solace from Final Fantasy XV. Sorrow Without Solace underscores a cutscene where the protagonists learn of the untimely death of one of their acquaintances, and it features a classic lament bass in the cellos. In addition to the descending stepwise motion from the tonic to the dominant of G minor, the harmonic progression implied by the bass line is also quite typical, blending the two harmonizations of the descending tetrachord that Ellen Roseanne delineates in her seminal article on lament. In The Ultimate Weapon, however, the track's anti-pastoral quality seeps into the descending tetrachord, resulting in a bass line that is an amalgamation of William Kaplan's diatonic and chromatic lament schemas. The A natural disrupts the diatonic descent from C to G and causes an imbalance in the harmonic rhythm of the lament bass by forcing the dominant harmony to arrive one measure later than anticipated. It also has implications for the harmonic progression underlying the descending tetrachord. Without the A natural, the harmonies of The Ultimate Weapon closely resemble Sorrow Without Solace, but as in Loop 1, this pitch is harmonized with a half-diminished seventh chord that remains unresolved, reflecting Roseanne's assertion that atypical harmonizations of the lament bass, quote, create a frustration of expectation and result in heightening of tension. Likewise, the dominant chord at the conclusion of the A and A prime sections fosters apprehension by moving to a 4 chord instead of the tonic harmony, which denies the listener any sense of closure. The further the player goes into the underground facility, the thinner the texture of The Ultimate Weapon becomes until all that remains is the piano and strings. Elizabeth Medina Gray describes how a buildup of musical layers, quote, should be a moment of triumphant conclusion, as is often the case with cumulative musical forms, unquote. But by enacting the opposite process, loops 2 through 4 of The Ultimate Weapon foster a growing sense of dread in the player. The loss of musical layers also allows the descending tetrachord to come to the fore, paralleling Emil's gradual recovery of his lost memories. The cyclical structure of the loops can be seen as an extension of this process. After a brief interjection of silence, Loop 1's ghostly a cappella vocals return as the player traverses the catwalk to the depths and continue as the camera comes to rest on Ultimate Weapon number 6, then Emil. The reappearance of Loop 1 at this point in the Katabasis invites the player to re-evaluate the Manor's music in light of the revelations about Emil's tragic past. In retrospect, the accompanying vocals, 2-note slurs, and the descending second psi motifs in the main vocal line cause Loop 1 to take on a simultaneously haunting and lamenting quality, mirroring the fact that the facility and Ultimate Weapon number 6 were beneath the Manor all along, but were unbeknownst to the player and forgotten by Emil himself until the end of the second Katabasis. The changing instrumentation and cyclical structure of the loops of the ultimate weapon reinforce that, while Emil's manor and the underground facility elicit feelings of apprehension, the dynamic music for these areas produces a more complex emotional response from players by aligning with the narrative contingencies of their two Katabases. Future research should measure players' response to the music and visual features in the manor and compare it to the 3 levels of the underground facility to gain greater insight into the effect that these sub-areas and their respective musical loops have on players.